Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Hello, good afternoon. How are you?
I don't know. How's that for an honest answer?
I think a lot of us are in that place.
I'm upright. That's a goal.
Our pretty much my whole motto has been one day at a time.
Right.
Sometimes upright's all you can ask for a day.
That's right. That's right. Or an hour.
That's right.
So Megan, are you facilitating this group?
No, that is Leslie Spears.
Leslie is. Okay.
I was trying to speak and I was on mute. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, Leslie. I did want to, at the beginning, have a conversation with the members of this group around reopening for January, and just to get their feedback, because we're working on a recommendation. Would that be okay in terms of our agenda today?
Sure.
Great. And Leslie, do we have enough folks on that we can get started, or are we still waiting on some?
Megan?
We've got majority of the people on the call thus far.
Megan, do you need to do a roll call or anything, or should we just jump in?
I'm going to download the attendance file at the end of the meeting and mark off that. So you all can go ahead.
Okay, great. Great. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and jump in. Welcome and thank you, parents, for taking time out of your busy days and busy seasons to be part of our advisory council meeting today. I'm Jason Glass, Commissioner of Education, and I'm delighted to spend some time with you. As you may have heard just coming on, one of the things that I'd like to talk with you about is the question that I think is on everybody's mind around what and how does school open in January? What does that look like? And what are the conditions under which that happens? Just to recap sort of where we are, a couple of weeks ago, the governor issued an executive order that effectively closed schools down to in-person learning following the Thanksgiving break. The schools were able to come back at the elementary level if they were below the red threshold on the Department of Public Health's color-coded advisory. But really, we only have a handful of districts who made that, their community was under that threshold and they're operating. Effectively, the vast majority of the state is in a virtual NTI remote setting presently. The question that's before us now is the governor's executive order only extended to January 4th, and that was intentional because the governor talked to us about wanting to look at information and then make a decision based on where things were at that point. So we have been asked, the Kentucky Department of Education, and I've been asked as the commissioner, to provide a recommendation to the governor on what happens in January in terms of the learning configuration. And I have been talking to numerous groups over this past week to get feedback and see if there's some kind of consensus or best answer that we have as a state. I will tell you in advance, I don't know that there's any sort of consensus. You talk to one group to the next, and there's all sorts of opinions on what the right thing to do is. And really, maybe there is no right thing. Maybe that isn't the best way to talk about this problem, because every one of our choices has a significant downside. And really, the choice is what set of consequences are you accept with the choice that you make. And so that's what I think makes this difficult, in that there is no sort of best practice or right thing to do. There's a choice to be made, and a choice that needs to be made. So we are right now compiling that recommendation to give to the governor. I did want to make sure that we waited on that until I had the chance to talk with you and hear from you what your perspectives were on this question. You are my advisory council, and so this is a real-time advice to me, and that I can pass along to the governor. So I also wanted to just underscore that this is not the Kentucky Department of Education, nor the state board, nor my decision. We don't have the authority to say what school looks like in January. But the governor does through executive order, or in absence of an executive order, local school boards are the ones who make that decision. So it's not the commissioner's call or decision. Hold on just a second. There we go. So my question for you, and I'm going to ask this, and then I'm going to give you a minute to think about it. And then I'll ask you to come on and unmute and give your answer. What should we recommend to Governor Beshear around schools opening in January? What should that look like? So I'll stop there. We're going to take about a minute. I'll turn off my camera and mute. I want you to think about that. And what is it that you would recommend to Governor Beshear that he do? Then we'll come back together and talk about that. So let's take 1 minute and do that. Take about 20 more seconds. Okay. So I wonder if some of you could raise your hand, use the hand raise feature, and then I'll call on you with your hands raised, and then we'll, in that order, go through and allow folks to give their perspective on this. Let's start with Lauren Mitchell. Lauren, thanks so much for volunteering to go first.
Hi, thank you. I am a parent from Woodford County. I think that in this day and time, we really need to be considering mental health as well as the kids being sick. You know, what's more important, keeping our kids from getting sick or keeping our kids mentally healthy? We had, over the Thanksgiving break, a 15-year-old commit suicide in our high school. And this was a child whose parent is a counselor. This is a child who was seemingly doing well. And we're seeing, this isn't just one incident either. This is just the most recent. And at what point do we say it's okay and it's safer for these kids to be at home by themselves or at home away from teachers and friends and that safe environment that a school can provide? And at what point does that become less important and the fear of getting the coronavirus and spreading it, more important than our kids? I mean, because that is also physical safety. I understand that they said elementary school students, we want them in schools because it's more dangerous to have them at home by themselves. But these teenagers, it's just as much of a need. They need to be around their peer groups. They need to be in a safe learning environment. I have seen, even with my own children and some of my friends' children, they don't participate as much when it's a virtual classroom. They don't speak up for themselves as much when it's a virtual classroom. It's just, I think for me, what I would recommend personally to the governor is let each district decide for themselves. If the district has a solid plan in place, if the district has good safety measures in place. For example, we have a company that comes in and sanitizes each of our schools after each day. I believe it should be up to that school district on whether or not they can be in person, because I feel very strongly that it's extremely important to get these kids back in the building. Also, I think each district then needs to have a plan for parents who aren't comfortable with that. They can keep their child home if they feel that's necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. To sum up, your recommendation would be to restore local decision-making really on the basis of the concerns around student mental health and well-being for remaining in the virtual environment, and that local school districts have the flexibility to manage the virus in buildings, as you talked about, that's happening in Woodford County, and they have the flexibility to decide what the right model is for them. Great. Okay, thank you. Let's go to Laura Beard. Laura, you have your hand up.
Hi, I'm Laura Beard. I live in the Bracken County School District. I'm the parent of 2 8th graders. I'm also the family engagement coordinator for the Pritchard Committee and currently have 38 parents who are going through our Commonwealth Institute for Parent Leadership. They represent parents that serve on SBDMs, local school boards, PTA, etc. So I also have their perspective to share as well as my own. I'm going to just echo what Lauren just mentioned and say that I found Superintendent Brian Kreisman's most recent op-ed letter really in line with my thinking around local districts and being able to support local districts in making the right decisions for their students. I do want to bring up something that our parent leadership group feels very strongly about, that regardless of what happens after the winter break, those districts that have been in quote unquote NTI or virtual learning since this began, they are going to need some kind of transition back that allows students to really unpack the mental health needs that they've had over the last few months, the socialization issues that have come up. I've personal experience. My one daughter made the honor roll for the very first time in this small district. She was super excited. As soon as we went to virtual, she's back to failing. She needs that one-on-one attention. She needs a teacher in the classroom. And so I can just say that I have, I echo what Lauren says, but I also think for those who stay in virtual learning, we need to have a plan for mental health when students do return, whether it be in 2020, the of 2021 or the fall.
Thanks so much, Laura.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. So I want to summarize what I heard you say, and that is to restore the decision-making to the local districts, really out of concerns around academic losses that students are experiencing right now, that the local districts have the capacity and the information to manage this, but there also needs to be a plan for how we support students that are returning from a virtual or remote experience. Is that fair summary?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Let's go to Rhonda Logston. Rhonda, are you able to come on?
Can you all hear me?
We can. Go right ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry because my because of technology, I have to call in and go through the computer. So thank you. I'm Rhonda Logston with Kentucky SPIN. We're the Parent Training and Information Project funded through the U.S. Department of Education under IDF funds. So we represent and work with families. We are all families of persons, or we're persons with disabilities and or family members helping one another. I too agree with Lauren and Laura, but here's where I think that we really need is I want them back in class as soon as they possibly can, right? And I know that it's critical for their mental health, but especially when we're talking about children who have IEPs, special needs, this back and forth is more dangerous to them than any. So I think we need to think about it very critical, and not just for children with disabilities, all children, is that let's take a close look at it. If we really do not think that we are comfortable when we hit January 4th, it to me is more harmful to throw everybody back and then we have to pull back again. So you've got all this back and forth to where we're really not allowing the children to adapt and get what they need, because they're not even learning at that point. They're trying to adapt to the situation that they're in and handle it. I don't know if that's making much sense the way I mean it, but that is sort of the battle that COVID's created for us, is because and like Laura said, you know, and I'm a proud foster adoptive mom to the greatest gift of my life. We're talking to gifted and talented students. Since we did NTI, I'm going to be lucky if he does not fail. I'm just going to be honest. And I'm probably failing as an NTI mom. I'm just going to throw it out there because, you know, all of us are doing the best that we can. And regardless if they have a disability or not, our children, not just with the mental health, but how are we ever going to be able to get them back to where they would have been at this point is a huge concern. And then I'm worrying if we keep flipping back and forth, we're not even going to help them move towards getting better. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I just came off the meeting before this one with the Kentucky Department of Education staff, and someone made that exact same point, that it's really disruptive to go back and forth. And they concluded with thinking that then again, and similar to what Laura and Lauren had said, to sort of smooth that out, it's really best to not have a state determination as to when you go in and out of in-person learning, because that allows the local district to better be flexible and determine when the right time is for their students. Do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. It's there. The bad thing about this, there is no great right answer, right?
Right. Yeah.
and I worry about all of our kids' mental health, because at the end of this, we're living through a pandemic, and if they don't make it, we cannot lose another child. We've lost too many, and not just the children, the parents, the teachers. Everybody's mental health has been affected so bad that there are some days I'm just grateful that we can all get up and everybody is still together. You know, even outside of everything we should be learning. So thank you so much, Commissioner.
Thank you. I appreciate your perspective. Let's go to Carrie. Carrie, I see your hand is up. Can you unmute and tell us what you would recommend?
Yes, my name is Carrie Gazar. I am the Serve Kentucky Program Officer, and I oversee 20 AmeriCorps programs across the state, half of which are education-based programs. So we have tutors in probably about more than half of the counties in Kentucky have AmeriCorps tutors. So I have two concerns, one as a parent and one as a person who works with people who are dealing with education. As a parent, my daughter is also struggling with NTI. It's more of a struggle for us to get her to do her work than it is her to, the content isn't hard. It's one, not learning a whole lot, but two, trying to stay motivated to keep on schedule and on track. I formerly worked in education and I'm still struggling to keep her on track. So I am for the idea of kids going back to school, but I think we need to be cautionary in that respect. And I do agree the districts should decide that. And I think that it should be recommended that they make schedules that are a little more flexible. So not all kids in school all at the same time, but sort of staggered type schedules, I think would be just advice to give, not necessarily say, okay, we're going to let you go back, but you have to do it this way. But just, you know, if the Department of Education can come up with a plan that a couple of different plans that they could potentially recommend, I think that might be helpful. But I also have concerns for the teacher safety. And, you know, again, I do very much want my daughter back in school, but I have concerns that we're putting the teachers more at risk than we are our students. And that's a concern for me. I have a husband who is disabled and a compromised immune system, and I would be concerned of anything that my daughter might pick up there from either a teacher or another student and then bring home. So I have a lot of different perspectives and I don't have a good answer, but I do think the district should have more power to make that decision, but I think they need to be guided in a way that is helpful and uses some experts to make sure that the plans are solid and going to keep as many people safe as possible.
Thank you. And I just wanted to react to something that you said. You know, I've been in, I don't know how many of these conversations with, I don't know how many groups at this point. And a lot, I think, is the answer. I've been in a lot of these conversations. And one thing that struck me while you were talking, and so, you know, that question of what's right. Almost everybody that I listen to about this, I can't disagree with any points they raise.
Right.
From the people that are on here today to, you know, when I talk to teachers who are largely opposed to returning to in-person learning, I can't disagree with their points either. Or folks that want there to be all local decisions. I understand that. And folks that say, well, there should be some consistency to it at the state. I can't disagree with any of. So I mean, I think one of the things that we've got to accept in this situation is there may not necessarily be a right or wrong, and there's a choice that has to be made, and there are consequences associated with that choice.
I agree, and I don't envy the governor or anyone else who has to make these decisions, because I can't imagine the difficulties in trying to weigh the various options and deal with the different factions of people who have a stake in this. And so I agree with you in that there's no easy answer, but at the same time, I feel like. And I don't want this to sound too political, but I'm very happy that Governor Beshear is our governor, and I would like it to stay that way. But I'll be honest, I worry that if we continue with things shut down as they are, that we're not going to get another term for the governor. And I know that shouldn't be a concern, but it is for me, because I like his leadership and I think it's important that we keep him around. But I also am concerned about, you know, the number of angry people who feel like their rights are being trampled on by not letting their kids go to school and stuff. So,
right.
Like I said, I shouldn't be political, but.
Well, I think that's something that that the governor has to take into account, and you know, how much political capital does he have? How can that be expended, and what are the consequences for doing that? I believe that is part of his calculation for sure. Let's turn to Mandy Sapp. Mandy's got her hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, Commissioner. My point of view actually is probably going to be a little bit different from some of the previous ones, I think that it's a good idea that we are closed. I have a bachelor's in biology from UK, where I focused on microbiology and viruses in general. And while we are learning more and more every day about this virus, the long-term effects, whether it's on our children, on our teachers, on the parents that are coming back in, I think it's extremely concerning, because we don't know what those long-term effects are going to be. And to minimize, I don't feel that herd immunity is necessarily the end result, which is what it seems like we're going to be going to if we do reopen the schools. I think that when you give, while I understand localizing each district and letting each district decide their own whether they're going to stay open or closed. The problem with that is not all the counties were actually adhering to the guidelines in which Dr. Stack and everybody set forth. Like our county specifically, we went red, yet we still stayed open because that. So how can, if you give the leadership, just local municipalities, the ability to choose or whether we're open or closed, we have to be assured that they're going to make the right decision where that's concerned. I mean, we had an increase just in our county alone of like 40 cases within a 7-day period. And yet they're like, no, well, there wasn't enough in the schools, the actual schools, that to deem actually being closed. But I mean, it doesn't matter if it's in the schools or just in the community in general, because that's going to affect our schools in just overall. So I think that it's very concerning to look at reopening the schools right now, especially on the incline of cases that we have. And I mean, there is zero good situation about this. And I understand about the mental health and everything, but are there services that we could provide to those children that are struggling in order to best assist that, whether it's, group activities, even outside of the school hours, whether like virtual or just encouraging our children to talk to their peers via online or telephone or whatever, because it just concerns me a lot to see the number of increase in cases that we've had just now, and then we're going to be jumping back in because the number of cases extremely rose as soon as schools started reopening. And I don't see it getting any better. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mandy. Thanks for sharing that perspective. And I think we can hear you struggling with this as well, and appreciate your stance around that. We also have to take into account the public health and student health and staff health considerations as part of this. I saw a hand come up from someone who had. They just had the guest marked. I don't know if that person wants to go ahead and speak. We can't see your name, guest, but if you want to unmute and make your perspective heard, that would be appreciated. Oh, okay. Now hands gone down. So I guess that one, that person didn't wish to share. I think, let's see, I'm looking in the chat now. And I see Rachel is on here saying that not sure how to raise her hand. Rachel, why don't you go ahead and I'll recognize you now. If you'd like something that you'd like to contribute, please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can, go right ahead.
All right, I'm not sure why my computer doesn't do it. I guess because I don't have it downloaded. But in Spencer County, I feel like we were doing well. We implicated the hybrid schedule and our numbers were actually staying really low despite like community numbers. And I know Jefferson County, it would be pretty difficult for them to do something like that. But with the hybrid, we had half students going Monday, Tuesday, and the other half going Thursday, Friday. And on Wednesdays, everyone had a community building day where everybody was online. And it gave the staff a little extra day to clean up the school and go around with foggers. And just having that extra time to be in school really helped my kids pick up on things where I'm not able to, working full time, teach them and learn new things, because there are new ways of doing things. I don't know every way that they're teaching kids now in order to teach them how to do the arrow way and these things. But it was nice having the extra couple days at least for them to pick up on it. And our numbers did stay low. They were able to stay 6 feet apart. There was more room in the cafeteria for them to adequately space out. And as far as like mental health, it is challenging. I'm SBDM representative, and that's all parents talk about is how they're overwhelmed. Their kids are overwhelmed. The NTI is overwhelming. They're rushing to get work done. The expectations are unrealistic on families, and it makes it hard for kids to learn when parents are rushing through it. And you're right, there is no right or wrong to it. And, you know, I don't know, it can go every which way. But some parents I know struggle with the access to it and the time and maybe the delivery of the NTI. So a lot of that has a big impact on the mental health too, and it being overwhelming. But I don't know. I know we're all frustrated.
Right, right. I think that might be the how we sign our memories about this whole year. Is frustrated, the experience that we've had. Well, thank you, Rachel, for your perspective, and thanks everyone for letting me gather this feedback from you. It's been really, I think, highlights the challenges that we face. We are working on a recommendation to the governor right now, and of course, as I mentioned before, it'll be the governor's decision as to what he chooses to do with that. But I do think that there is an interest in trying to find a balance to all of the interests that have been presented and that we've heard from. And you know, what is the place within this where maybe not everyone gets everything they wanted, but we get to a place where we understand each other and we can work to finish this school year, have it be safe, have it be a quality educational experience for our students, and get to a place where this virus isn't controlling our decisions. That is the goal ahead for all of us. Toward that end, I'm going to go ahead and step off of this meeting. My work is going to go to work on that recommendation right now. I appreciate the feedback that you've given me. I've taken notes and also captured some of the comments that have been made in the chat, and we'll work to weave them into what we take to the governor. Appreciate everybody and hope that you have a great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. We sent you the minutes earlier, and we need, I want to find if somebody has a minutes.
I'll do that. Cindy Wren, motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Before we approve them, there was a typo, just a couple of them that I wanted to point out, if that's okay.
Sure.
You have Stacy Stratman is both in attendance and absent. Her name is in both places.
Thank you.
At the top of the minutes, and then on down in that first, it's on the second page in the first section. It's talking about daily participation, and it's supposed to say Infinite Campus, but it says Infinite Camos.
Okay, thank you.
Other than that, I can second the motion with corrections.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion carried. All in favor? Thank you very much. Motion carried. Guess I'm going to hand it over now to Jennifer Larkins with the Office of Assessment and Accountability.
Thank you, Leslie. Get this pulled up. I'll share my slides. While that's happening, I'll just say that I'm happy to be with you here today. I am Jenny Larkins, and I'm a program in the Office of Assessment and Accountability. And I'm going to share with you today some proposed changes that are going to take place in Kentucky's school accountability system. So before I begin, can you see the slides here?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. So I'll kind of advance those myself. Now my plan is today just to give you kind of a general overview with some specific details about a few things. But if any point along the way you want me to go into more detail or you have a question about something, then please just jump in and let me know that. But we're going to start, if I can get this to advance here, we're going to start with a question for you, really. As we go through these proposed amendments, we'd like to hear your thoughts and opinions and just general reactions to the changes that we're proposing from your perspective as parents. So keep that in mind as we go through, please. Our state accountability system measures the annual progress of schools and districts, including all students, and then also by student demographic groups. Well, for a little background about why we're even talking about changes to the accountability system, in the last session of the General Assembly, Senate Bill 158 was passed, and that bill introduced some fairly significant changes to the system. Now, all states are required by the U.S. Department of Ed to have an accountability system, and they provide guidelines for what needs to be included. But there are some areas where the states can sort of customize some of the details, and that's exactly what Senate Bill 158 has done. Sorry. So the changes introduced by the bill are most different from the previous system are shown here for you. There was a new term added, the word exclusively, that puts limits on what the state can use to measure annual progress for schools and districts and students. And the bill lists very specific indicators, or state indicators they call them, that are going to be used in the system. Now, indicators aren't a new concept. They've been in the system before, but that exclusiveness that they've introduced is new to the system, where we can't add or take away from that. So those state indicators will be evaluated on status and on change that we'll talk more about in a moment. And then finally, when we report results, the bill says that we'll be required to do so in a color-coded dashboard. On to slide five here. We're going to drill down into the specifics a little later, but first I'll just define for you what we mean by status and change and state indicators. For each state indicator that we'll share on the next slide, we'll measure status, which is current year performance. That's, again, not a new concept. We've done that in previous systems. How did schools perform this year on the measures that we use? We'll also measure and report change for each indicator, which is a new element to Kentucky's accountability system. And change is just measures whether there's been an increase or a decrease from prior year performance. So again, we'll determine and report status and change for the indicators, and the two components will combine to provide an indicator performance level for each state indicator. So here you see on slide 6, those 6 very specific indicators that I've referred to, listed here on the slide. The first two, state assessment results in reading and mathematics and state assessment results in science, social studies, and writing, are measured using results from the K-Prep test that we give each spring in grades 3 through 8 and grade 10 in reading and math, and then science, social studies, and writing are administered once in each grade band. So science is grade 4, 7, and 11 in science, then social studies and writing grades 5, 8, and 11. English learner progress indicator is measured with an English proficiency exam, and we administer that to students who are in the EL program. We call them ELs, our English learners. The quality of school climate and safety indicator reports student survey results. Now, the first 4 state indicators will be included at all 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high. But then when we get past those 4, we add 2 additional state indicators at the high school level. In post-secondary readiness, students can use a number of options to demonstrate whether they are ready for post-secondary work, either in a college environment or in a career path. And then finally, graduation rate, which at the basic level is the percentage of students who graduate in 4 or 5 years. So with that background, we have here for you a summary of the regulation changes that were brought to the board last week. And in addition to the changes that directly are mandated by Senate Bill 158, we also are going to have to make some changes to some of the language in the regulation in order to align with the bill. As an example, in the regulation as it was previously written, the indicator that measures reading and mathematics was called proficiency. Well, to align with Senate Bill 158, we're going to have to change that terminology, that wording, so that the state indicator is renamed State Assessment Results in Reading and Mathematics. There's also a change under the dual credit language. Now, I mentioned that there were several options that students could use to demonstrate the post-secondary readiness, and one of those is successful completion of dual credit. Well, in the previous system, it said that students could demonstrate post-secondary readiness by meeting benchmarks in 6 hours of dual credit. But we aren't actually able to collect hours, we collect course information. So to align with the data that we are actually able to collect, that wording is being changed from students have to meet benchmarks for 6 hours to they have to successfully complete 2 courses. So that really there's no process or requirement changes there to the dual credit option. We're just aligning that to match the data collection method that we use. Then on the next bullet, next section with bullets here, with the new accountability amendments from Senate Bill 158, the department had to get guidance from the Kentucky Board of Education on a few items that will help us more clearly define the implementation of the new system. And so their guidance led to some additional recommendations that we'd like to be included in the regulation. Now I'm going to go out of order just a bit here. The department recommended included, I say the board, recommended including federally allowed flexibilities into the English learner progress indicator. So we had some flexibilities that were in the previous system as an option that we could potentially add, but the board said that they would, we should take advantage of those. And those are flexibilities that will allow us to take into account the age of the student, the level of proficiency they have in English when they arrive, and then the degree of interrupted schooling that they have. So, you know, the English learner progress, of course, it's just not, the students don't start at an even level. So it takes into account kind of where they are when they come into the program. And the board wanted that to happen. So we'll go into detail in the slides coming up for those other 3 bullets there. And those other 3 bullets are where we're going to really ask for your feedback and reactions on that combining status and change for the state indicators, weights for combining overall performance, and the minimum in count. And then finally, the last change to the regulation doesn't directly impact accountability, but it's been added to connect some reporting pieces mentioned in Section 5 of the regulation to Kentucky's Consolidated State Plan. So we're going to take a closer look now at a few of the items we mentioned earlier that are recommended based on the guidance that we received from the board. And starting with combining status and change, which we've demonstrated with using colored charts that we'll see on the next slide. You won't see these colored charts within the regulation itself, but using the colored charts will help us explain and understand the combining of status and change into an indicator performance level. So you see on the slide here, we're displaying two tables that have been shared with the board and with other advisory groups. The 5x5 grid on the left is what the department has recommended, but we also developed an alternative table to look at. Now, as we review these charts, keep in mind that each one of those 6 specific state indicators we talked about will be evaluated for status and change that combine to provide a performance level, a colored table like one of these being proposed. To interpret the tables, let's start at the first column, beginning on the left. You see that this column shows the levels to be reported for status, which is, again, our current year performance. The bill specifies those labels for us. The bill tells us exactly what those labels need to say, that they need to range from very low at the bottom here on the chart through very high at the top. Then across the top row, you see levels reported for change, improvement or not improvement from prior year. And those levels range from declined significantly from prior year to increased significantly from prior year. Status and change, again, will combine to provide a performance level. So demonstrated in this chart, that performance level would be a color at the intersection or cell where status and change meet. So if we look at the recommended table, that one on the left there, and start with a status level of medium in the current year. So that's middle row, kind of in middle of the column, medium in current year status. We'll see a color represented as we go across for each level of change that combines with that status level. So let me try to explain. If my current year status level is medium in current year, and my performance declined significantly from the prior year, where those two levels intersect, the cell is orange. And using that same status level across the row, if my change level is declined significantly, it's orange, we said, but if I maintain my performance from the prior year, my performance level is yellow. And then, of course, if I show quite an increase, significant increase from the prior year, my cell is going to be green.
Jenny,
So that's,
you have a question from Cindy, I think.
okay, sure.
So is this done per student, or is this done for the grade, for the subject, or for the school for each subject, or what's it based on?
This will be, and we're going to go into more detail in just a few minutes, so I'll answer partially now and then we'll address the rest in a moment. But each one of those 6 specific indicators will have a chart like this where they will have a status level, a change level, and then that overall performance level that we're using a color to represent, again, for each one of those indicators. But then also, we're going to see that for each student group. So we'll have one for the indicator for all students and then for each student group. And when we get a little bit farther into the section where we're talking about in count and things like that, we'll go into a little more detail than that. So again, each indicator in the system for all students and for those student subgroups. So I hope that clarified enough until we get a little further, and then you just let me know if we don't clarify that more.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So now let's talk a little bit about the characteristics of the tables. You'll notice just visually that the table is symmetrical. The yellow areas run right through the middle on there, and on opposite corners you see that red mirrors blue, orange mirrors green, representing there that there are just as many ways for schools to have the highest levels of performance as there are ways to have the lowest levels of performance. So 4 blue and 5 green, 4 red and 5 orange. But even within each color, there are multiple ways that a school might land on a color. If we look at box C, for example, you see that a school could have a performance level of yellow if their current year status is very high in current year, and they declined significantly from prior year. So they have a yellow there. But also, if we look at box D, we can see that another school might have had a performance, would have a performance level of yellow if their current year status is very low, but they increased significantly from the prior year. So both schools have a performance level of yellow, but the schools have actually very different stories to tell, how they got there. So the color is just a visual way to get an initial look and idea about how a school's performance is in a certain indicator. But you really need to look further into the details to find out exactly why a school might have the performance level that they do have. So the two tables are pretty similar, but where you'll notice a difference in the alternative and recommended is across that middle row, the row that's assigned to the status level, medium, and current year. So in the recommended table, you see orange, orange, yellow, green, green. In the alternative table, across the middle row, you see orange, 3 yellows, and 1 green. So really just a small difference that basically just affects 2 cells there. So just a little bit of difference. So I'm going to pause here now and then ask for your thoughts and reactions just on the recommended versus the alternative. Do you prefer one over the other, or do you have any comments about either one of those? Helen, are you able to assist in the chat or with hands up? So when you're sharing slides, you can't see those kinds of things. Do we have any questions or
You
anyone?
do have a hand up, and I'm trying to see who it is.
That is Judith Bradley.
Okay.
Judith, please feel free to just chime in.
Judy, you might be on mute. You may have to.
Can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you, Jenny. I think Judith maybe, I'm not sure if she has her mic. Yeah, her mic is on mute, so she may need to unmute Judith.
Okay. Judith, if you're not able to unmute, would you mind to type it in there and we can come back to it in a few moments after we go through the next, or I can wait, either one.
And Cindy, did you have any additional questions? Oh, she just took her hand down. Okay.
Okay. All right. Well,
Cindy, did you put your hand back up?
Oh.
No, I'm just moving my mouse around, and every time I do, it just slides off the hand and it does that. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
All right. So Helen, anything else in the chat?
She says she's not. She says she's muted, but she's not sure how to unmute. You have to click on the microphone icon, Judith.
She's having some issues with Microsoft Teams. I believe she put her question in the chat box, though.
What was the thinking around, what was the thinking around the change made? I am sure.
Okay, I'm assuming that maybe she means the difference between the two tables, how we have extra yellow in that middle row. And really, Judith, it just is a matter of different values that were kind of expressed from the board groups. It's not a huge difference, but in the recommended table, you see that there's just one extra opportunity for getting into that higher level of performance, but there's also one extra opportunity for getting into that lower. So we tried to reflect the values and emphasis that we thought the groups that we listened to wanted to see. We recommended the first one, and that so far has tended to be the one that people have agreed with, but we want to know if you agree with it. So, would you rather see schools in that middle range of performance if they were medium in current year and declined? Do you think that that is maybe something that's kind of in the middle range, or do you think that should still be in one of the lower ranges? So that's really just kind of what do you think should be emphasized or de-emphasized kind of in the chart?
I like the recommended chart better. Just like you said, if they decline, they would still be the same as if they maintained, or even if they increase. And I don't think it'd be fair for the ones that put in the extra effort and increase the scores to have the same color as the schools that declined. Does that make sense?
It does. And
Okay.
Thank you for that feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments on the charts?
I don't see any more. I just want to verify that we have, nope, I don't see any additional comments.
Okay. Well, we can always come, answer those questions later on if they come up again. So that's just fine. All right. So moving on here to slide 10, we'll go into this section. Once we've established an indicator performance level for each state indicator, which we just saw demonstrated in those tables, those indicators will then combine to provide an overall performance rating. Now, you can think of the overall performance rating maybe sort of like a class grade that your child might receive. Behind that class grade, there are going to be various components that contribute to that grade. Maybe how the student performed on class assignments, whether they turned their homework in, whether they participated in class, tests and quizzes and things like that. So that would kind of be similar to the state indicators, how they perform, what measures you're using. Well, in the way that teachers will sometimes give weight to the components that go into that class grade, like class assignments are worth 50%, participation is 10%, and so on. The overall performance rating will also be calculated using weights that are assigned to the different state indicators. And you see those here on the slide, the ones that we've recommended for you. And this is another area where we're going to ask if you have some input. We've had weights in the accountability system for a number of years. One difference in these suggested weights is in the separation of elementary and middle school. These two grade bands have typically had the same weights for their indicators. They've shared those same weights. But the board expressed a desire to see a separation with elementary and middle there that allows more flexibility in assigning emphasis to the indicators. For example, you see that there's strong weight assigned to reading and mathematics at the elementary level, which kind of emphasizes its importance at that level. And then at middle school, you have almost identical weights between the reading and math and then the science, social studies, and writing. And that really kind of demonstrates the value that the board and other advisory groups place on all the content areas. You'll notice that the high school level incorporates 2 additional indicators we talked about than elementary and middle have. So that kind of impacts how the weights can be distributed. So it's going to look a little differently there. There are also federal guidelines that impact the weights. For example, you see at the high school, reading and mathematics and graduation rate must have the greatest emphasis. And at elementary and middle school, reading and mathematics and English learner progress must carry the greater weight. So you see that federal influence reflected here in the chart in all 3 grade bands, where the state assessment results in reading and math, that indicator has the highest weight value of all the indicators at all grade levels. So again, that's the federal influence there. But while we do have those federal limitations, there is some a little flexibility in the state for setting the weights, especially the rest of those components. So just taking a look at the weights here and thinking about what percent of this indicator is going to contribute to that overall rating. Thinking about that, we've had some feedback from other advisory groups, but today we really are hoping to hear your feedback on these proposed weights. So I'll break here again and give you opportunity to share your feedback or ask any questions you have.
And again, Jenny, you do have 2 hands that are up. One is a guest, and the other one is Cindy. I'm not sure if your mic is, if you have your hand up or not, but it's showing that you do.
Yes, I really do.
Okay, great.
And if I ask
Okay.
if I ask too many questions, just tell me to hush.
Oh, no.
So I understand the elementary and middle comes from K-Prep. What about high school? Will it still be from the ACT, or what will it be this year?
Well, we have also K-Prep tests at high school. In the reading and mathematics indicator, we have a K-Prep reading and mathematics test that's given at grade 10 in high school. And then for the science, social studies, and writing indicator, we also have K-Prep tests at grade 11 that measure for that indicator. English learner progress continues to be the Access English Proficiency Exam. That's at elementary, middle, and high. The quality of school climate and safety, that's at all 3 grade bands. You report student survey results. Students take a survey answering some questions about the school climate and safety. And then post-secondary readiness is, I guess, the most complex. We don't really have assessments that are required to meet that indicator. We do require the ACT to be taken, and students can use it in the post-secondary readiness indicator. But if they don't meet benchmarks on the ACT, they can meet post-secondary readiness using lots of other options. We have a list, a chart on our website somewhere, maybe currently being revised or updated, but it lists all the different options that students have to meet academic readiness, like the ACT, the college placement exams, international baccalaureate, dual credit that we talked about. Career
readiness is also, Jenny.
Yes,
they also have some certifications.
Yes, Helen, I was talking about the academic readiness part, but
okay.
Right. Then also there's a career path where students can demonstrate career readiness, so they have the choice, academic or career readiness. And that's what Helen was talking about with the different certifications that they can earn more along the career track. And then graduation rate is just simply a percentage. We use a 4 and 5 year cohort, meaning we average the students who graduated in 5 and in 4 and then in 5. It's a little involves a little formula there, but it's basically just the percentage of students who graduated. So did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay.
And Jenny, you have 2 additional hands that are up. One is a guest and the other one is Lauren.
Okay, sure.
So guest, if you could, I'm not sure who this is.
Well, they can just speak up if they like.
Okay. You'd have to take your mic off mute. Okay, we can go to Lauren. Lauren, do you have a
Yes,
question? Okay.
it's more of a comment or an observation. I would think that the quality of school climate and safety should have more weight with middle and high school students, especially if it's based on a survey that they're taking. One, I would think they'd be more aware of their school climate, and things about the safety of the school would directly affect how they learn. It does at the elementary level, but I believe it would be more so with teenagers. That's just food for thought, I guess. I just don't think it should be weighted the same for middle and high schools as it is with elementary. Because are you testing every grade in elementary? Are you surveying every grade? Because I would think, a kindergartner, first grade, second grader, they wouldn't be as aware of what's going on in their school as much as a middle or a high school student would.
Right, and thank you. That is exactly the kind of feedback we're looking for. And to answer your question, the Quality of School Climate and Safety Survey is taken at the tested grades. So that would be, 3 through 8, 10, and 11. So every student that takes a K-Prep test, they take the climate and safety survey.
I still think even with third, fourth, and fifth graders, you're going to have more of that awareness at the middle and high school level than you would at the elementary level. And I think inherently elementary schools are a safe place, generally speaking. And then middle and high school, you have more peer pressure, bullying, things of that nature, plus safety issues that come into effect as the students get older and have more responsibilities in their learning, etc. I would think that you would need to weight those heavier than an elementary school.
I was going to ask if that's what you meant there. So really what I'm kind of hearing is that maybe quality of school climate and safety, the weight at elementary seems about what you think would be right, but you'd like to see more weight shifted in the middle and high school.
Well, and it just should, I feel like it should be weighted more heavily in the upper grades than it is in the elementary. Whether that stays at a 4 for elementary or stays at a 4 for the middle and high and then goes down for elementary, I don't know, but it should just be different, I feel.
Thank you for clarifying that. That's helpful. And we'll
You're welcome.
share
Thank
that.
you.
Okay.
And Judith, are you able to connect to us?
I think I've finally got this. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, a miracle. Thank you. So regarding the climate conversation, and first and foremost, thank you for asking for input. It's appreciated. I wonder if there ought not be an overall increased weighting on that category. And I would defer to the Pritchard Committee on this, as there's been tremendous study done over the years here in Kentucky and also nationally. And we know that school climate contributes significantly to student performance, frankly, at every level. And students, even in elementary grades, are actually remarkably capable of providing input and giving feedback on this topic. So that's just a comment. But I know that the Pritchard Committee has had, a lot of input over the years, and especially in the last couple of years. And I would urge the KDE and the board to address that particular question to the Pritchard Committee for some input. My comment regarding the overall accountability weights is actually another question, and that is how the benchmarks for the cutoffs for assessment, or not actually the cutoffs, the measures themselves are derived. So in other words, if we're talking about middle school, for example, result of 46, first of all, what are the underlying, well, to make it a little simpler, let's just talk about what the reading and math scores. How are the K-Prep scores themselves derived in order to arrive at this number?
Students,
and maybe I'm not asking the right question, so
no,
forgive
no,
me if
that's okay.
I don't have the right question.
So this particular number is the 46, for example, is how you want that indicator to contribute to the overall rating. But going back to your question with the K-Prep test, students receive a performance level, and you've probably heard these terms: novice, apprentice, proficient, distinguished, and then they earn credit based on that performance level. So novice is 0, I believe, apprentice 0.5, proficient 1 point, and distinguished 1.5 or something to that. Don't have it committed to memory exactly, but they earn credit that way. So in that indicator, if you have 100 students who are proficient, that's basically 100 points there. Now our data team calculates all of that behind the scenes, but that contributes to the performance of the indicator. And then once you get that, how much do you want that indicator to count?
So there are benchmarks attached. Those proficiency levels are in the current regulation under section 4, I believe it's 2B. But my question then is, those proficiency levels, the points associated with them are tied, are they not, to some performance level on the K-Prep exam itself?
Yes.
So, okay. And where is that published, how they associate?
We have a cut scores document somewhere on our website, but then if you want more technical information, there is a page on our website. I believe
Jenny?
yes.
Remember, these are new standards, and so we will have a new standard setting, and that's where we will get those cut scores. So we don't have them yet because we did not have any assessments this past spring.
Well, that's right. I'm still thinking pre-COVID.
This is Helen Jones, and I apologize. I work with Jenny. She's one of my colleagues, and I'm just here to support her. And so in the spring, it was the first time the state has adopted new standards. That's why we now have state assessments for, instead of using the ACT at the high school level, we now have K-Prep assessment, or Kentucky Academic Standards, that will be assessments tied to those new standards for the high school. And so we have not had state assessment. We didn't have any state assessments in the spring because we received a waiver due to COVID. So the first time that we actually have state assessment, be it this spring or whenever we're able to actually have students back in the building, then after that we will do what we call a standard setting, and that will be tied to those cut scores that you're referring to, if I'm not mistaken. Does that help?
Okay. Yeah, it does, Helen. Thank you. Is there though someplace I could go to see what it is presently, or what it would have been given the current, or what was going to be?
Judith, I can't point you directly to where that might be. I can't think of the name of the page where we house some of the more technical things, but if you will put your email address in the chat, Helen will copy that down for me and we'll get that to you.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on the weights? Okay, so continuing that topic of weights that combine performance, I'll just again remind you that each one of those indicators will be evaluated for status and for change that combine to provide an indicator performance level. Then those indicator levels will combine to produce an overall performance rating, or designation, sometimes we call it. And we've had overall designations in previous systems. You might remember the most recent system that we had where schools received 1-star through 5-star ratings. Well, in the suggested regulation changes, the proposal is to incorporate those weights we discussed into combining all of the state indicators to produce an overall performance rating that's indicated with a color. And the colors that you see here on the slide will range from highest to lowest, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red, with blue being the highest and red being the lowest. Schools will receive these color designations, but the colors are going to be based on data, of course, percentages and numbers behind those colors. And as Helen was mentioned about the standard setting with other things, to convert these numbers into a color representation or designation, we'll have to have a standard setting process for that, where we'll collaborate with our national experts that we work with in this kind of work, and then they'll involve our local superintendent's advisory council to set those cut scores for each of these color ratings. So what thoughts might you have just in general on just the idea of moving from a star rating to this proposed color-coded system? Do you have any thoughts one way or another about that? Helen, do we have any questions? Comments?
Will there also be an overall score to go along with the colors, or just the colors?
There will be numbers behind that color. And schools, of course, will know that, and all of that information will be put into the school report card, but just the same way it was with stars. But this color-coded way of showing that overall performance rating is similar to the stars, where schools, parents and other interested people could go onto that school report card and just get a quick visual look at how those schools were doing overall. And of course, as we mentioned earlier with other things, just getting a green or say a yellow as your overall rating, it tells you one thing, but schools can have many different ways of getting to yellow. So you'll want to go down further into details to find out exactly, what led to that yellow performance rating.
And Jenny, the only question that I've seen is about whether or not we would have no more stars, and you've already addressed that. So
yeah, stars have been stricken through in the regulation, and so now they're replaced with colors. Okay, if no more questions, then we'll turn our direction to the minimum in count. And I'm not sure, if you're familiar or not with this, but when we refer to the minimum in, we mean that for a student group to be included in the accountability and reporting for an indicator or indicators, there must be a minimum number of students in that demographic group. Now, earlier I mentioned that we have to report annual progress for schools, districts, all students, and for student demographic groups. If a school doesn't have that minimum number of students to represent the student group in an indicator, then that student group's performance won't receive a performance level for that indicator. So we'll share some examples of a minute that'll help clarify this, but to go into a little more detail here, historically, Kentucky has had an in count of 10 students per grade. The proposal is to move to an in count of 30 for the entire school, or possibly the entire student group. And that's really to emphasize more reliability in the system. So we talked about surveys earlier. If you survey 5 people, your results aren't quite as reliable as they would be if you surveyed 50. So that higher in count kind of helps with that reliability focus. But on the other hand, if we if we do move to an in count of 30, we will see some student groups fall out of accountability in some schools. So going to 30 may pull more in, but we're also would see some fall out. So for transparency, and so to ensure that the stakeholders and parents, the public, will still be able to see how those groups of smaller students performed, we're also proposing that we'll continue to use a minimum in of 10 in public reporting. So let's look at some examples of how this kind of plays out. In this example here on the screen, we're looking at how we would determine if a group meets the minimum in for the state assessment results in reading and mathematics indicator. For that indicator, again, students take reading and mathematics, and at the elementary school level, that is in grades 3, 4, and 5. If the student group we're determining is Hispanic students, for example, we would need 30 Hispanic students in those tested grades of 3, 4, and 5 for that group of students to be included and reported for this reading and mathematics indicator. If our situation is the one above the line, then let's say we have, 5 Hispanic students in grade 3, 10 in grade 4, and 25 students in grade 5. Well, that's a total of 40 students. So that total of 40 meets the minimum number required to include and report those Hispanic students in the system for that indicator. If we were only using 10, Hispanic students wouldn't be included in that indicator in that scenario above the line because we didn't have 10 per grade. Grade 3 only had 5. So moving to 30 just creates a little different process here. So if we're in the scenario below the line, we only have 20 students total in those grades. 5 at grade 3, 10, and 5. 20 students total in the grades that are taking reading and math tests. So those Hispanic students' performance would drop out of being included and reported for that indicator. Now, we don't just ask one time applied to everything, do we have 30 Hispanic students in the school? This minimum in is applied to every group for every indicator in the system. And the minimum in could be met for a group of students in one indicator and not another. So in other words, Hispanic students, for example, might be included in your reading and mathematics indicator, but they may be not reported for your science, social studies, and writing indicator. Moving on to the next model here. In this one, if we apply the minimum in of 30 to the state assessment results in science, social studies, and writing, in the school situation above the line, we have 40 students total. So we see that 40 students would put the student group into the accountability and reporting because we met the minimum in. But in the example below the line, with a total of 10 students, we didn't meet the minimum number of 30 students needed for that group to be included in the accountability reporting for that indicator. So in that same way, we would apply this procedure, so to speak, for every indicator for every student group. Some indicators are going to look different than others based on maybe how the school is configured or what grades are included in the indicator measure. For example, if we're determining minimum in for this science, social studies, and writing indicator at the high school level, we would only be looking at one grade to find 30 students because science, social studies, and writing are taken in grade 11 at high school. Another example is the English Learner Progress Indicator. It uses the English proficiency exam to, it's taken at all grade levels. So you would look for 30 English learners in the school in that case, and not just in one grade or 2 grades or 3 grades. So that's basically how the minimum N works. Hopefully I was clear on that, but I'm happy to go back and explain it. I know that minimum N sometimes is a topic that does seem difficult, complicated, hard to understand. So I will stop here and see if you first have any questions about minimum N, and then see if you have any feedback to share on this.
Jenny, there's one question.
Okay.
Well, it's two parts, one from one person.
Okay.
The question is from Cindy. And what if they're more than the minimum 30, but they're scored at the same level? Will that be reported? And then the next part of that is, I know they will be included in accountability, but will that be reported?
Okay, let's take one at a time. I may have to come back and ask you that second one. So the first one was, if we have more than 30, but they all performed in the same way, would they be reported and included in accountability? Well, let's say they will be included in accountability, but there are certain rules due to privacy laws that we have to follow in implementing the reporting that would keep that situation, students in that situation, from being reported. So we suppress data sometimes. So if you go into the report card and you see data that say data not available, or there's maybe an asterisk, oftentimes that's because the data have to be suppressed, either because there aren't enough students, not the minimum N met, or in cases like you just mentioned. Anytime there is an opportunity that someone would be able to determine which students scored at what level, then we would be required to suppress that data publicly. Now, schools are still going to get information about those students back to them, but it wouldn't be in a public reporting setting. Okay, so Helen, could you remind me again what the second part of that question was?
You covered it.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you. Okay, any other questions on minimum N?
I don't see any in the chat, and I'm trying to see if there are any hands up. There's one. Go back. Okay.
We do have a hand up?
Yes. Jacob?
Hi, this is Judith once again.
Judith, I'm sorry.
Hi, Judith.
That's okay. I switched to my son's account.
Okay.
I don't know if my problem is that I'm on a Mac or what. I apologize. This is not a question. This is a comment, and I'll probably write this up and send it to you all. But this deeply concerns me, and I won't go too far into the weeds here, but I understand the requirements to suppress data when you have minimum numbers. I am concerned, however, that particularly with our students with disabilities, and especially in smaller districts and or schools, that what we really need, in fact, is granular data that demonstrates and shows what is happening based on, for example, different disability types, because we tend to develop and design programs at the school and district level targeting disability students as if they are, in fact, a singular monolithic group when they're not. So one of the concerns that I have with this is the number 30 becomes even harder to achieve and to get data in several districts. I'm not only guessing, but I mean I'll take a look at it, and I'm sure that Greta has that information as well in her team. And I am wondering, and in fact suggesting, if there is not in those cases a way to at least provide perhaps even a different benchmark for those students, or not a different benchmark, but a different N count for some of these smaller groups. Students with disabilities may not be the only group, and look at trends. And if you cannot report the grouping or the data for a single school, perhaps data for a district can be reported. This is actually, in my opinion, one of the most necessary things to move the needle on achievement for our students with disabilities. We need a much deeper and better understanding of what's going on. And I will add to that group our Section 504 students, for whom there is insufficient reporting and breakdown as well. So you can just take those as comments. I know that there's a lot to unpack in that, but I'm going to continue to advocate for granular data, for trends when we cannot report the granular data, and for some creativity on how we can get reporting on behalf of these students whose needs are not necessarily as well understood as I think they could be. And I'll unmute myself on that. So thanks for listening.
That's okay. Thank you. I mean, that's very much appreciated, that detailed feedback like that. And we will definitely take that back and provide that feedback to at least to my superiors, and they'll take it from there. I believe that the board will receive your the general summary of the feedback we received from you today. So moving on then, we're at the end. This is basically a timeline of the process that these regulation changes have to go through. So right now you see we're in December. The board had a first read of these amendments to the regulation last week. They will look at it again in February. And at that point, they will determine whether or not, and most likely will prompt a 60-day public comment period. They may delay for some reason, but probably will be right after that meeting. And then it moves on to then where we take those public comments, address them in a statement of consideration to bring back to the board. And then if they approve that changes based on public feedback, then that moves through the legislative committees to be in place by next summer. So it's a lengthy process, and a lot of feedback is going to be collected between now and when the regulation is actually implemented. So some of the changes that you see today, by the time we get to that point where KBE is reviewing the statement of consideration next June, we could have significant changes to even what we looked at today. So if you have any additional questions after we leave this meeting with you, please feel free to email those to us. We have our contact information here, but you can also email me directly if you'd like to, and we'll try to get answers for you. And it's great to be with this group today. Helen, before we go, do we have any other comments or questions that have come in?
There was a question, when was the first reading? And I answered it. It was the first week of December is when the board met. Yes, December 3rd. And that recorded meeting is on the KDE Media portal if you'd like to watch that. All right, anything else? No, I don't see any additional questions, and I don't see any hands up either. So I think we're good. All right. Thank you so much, group. And someone have something? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just saying thank you for answering all my questions.
Sure. Thank you. We're old friends now. Thanks so much. And Leslie, I'll turn it back over to you now.
Sorry, I was on mute again. Our next speaker is Veronica Sullivan, and she's going to talk about parent-family engagement activities and supports.
Thank you, Leslie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to attempt to present my screen. Hopefully I can get it going for you. All right. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the feedback. I can't see faces or anything at this point, so. Okay, so my name is Veronica Sullivan. I am the director of the Division of IDEA Implementation in Preschool. And within our division, we have a guidance and support branch that obviously manages the guidance and support that we provide to our districts and parents and families. So I'm quickly going to share some resources with you as a group. So the first resource I want to bring your attention to is one that has recently come out. We had some meetings with stakeholders, including parents and advocates, about questions they may have during reopening of schools around students with disabilities. And I just took question number 4 from that actual document. And I'm going to answer the yes and give you just an overview of some of the resources that are available. But there are other questions in there as well if you're interested in reading that document. To get to these resources, you merely have to go to the KDE website, and in the search box in the top, just put parent resources into that search box. And that will immediately take you to this first page we have right here, the parent and family resource page. And it's a very broad overview page to help particularly new parents whose child has just gotten an IEP. It includes things like acronyms. There's a lot of acronyms in special education, and information about ARCs or IEP meetings. And that's just there for parents to access if they need that information. But it also links to additional content. And so if you start there, that's a good place to start if you're looking for resources, and it will begin to take you to other areas. It has break off links that you can access as well. So the next resource I wanted to highlight is a parent and family toolkit. And it has multiple sections, but I just wanted to bring your attention to the fact that there is a distance learning section that helps parents with resources around non-traditional instruction and distance learning. I do want to say everything on these pages is not created by KDE. There is so much information out there for parents that it can be very overwhelming. So what our staff did is really sat down and tried to compile the most effective resources to give to our parents and try to organize them for you so that we could disseminate that information in more of an orderly fashion, because there is a lot of support out there and sometimes that can be a bit overwhelming. There is also some web series that we did in collaboration with our special education regional cooperatives, and they do focus on NTI, and there are approximately, I think there's about 12 of them. We've been doing them since last spring. They're little 30-minute snippets. Sometimes they go a little bit over, but no more than 40 to my knowledge. So they're very short, and there are pieces within some of those webcasts that are for parents. It is geared towards educators, but they go into how to support parents, which may be really informative for parents of students with disabilities as they're viewing some of those. And I just took a couple to highlight. Like I said, there's around 12 of them, and they cover multiple areas in academics, including behavior. We also have web series for our youngest learners, for our state-funded preschool students. Again, we partnered with our Early Childhood Regional Training Center, and we followed that same model. These are much more parent-friendly, and for obvious reasons. Those students are very dependent on their parents, and so they may not have the ability to sit down at a computer. So our regional training center really wanted to focus on how the school and the families could work together to provide education for those students. So most of their content is around parents, and it is geared for educators, and then how to involve parents in that in the educational process of their preschool student. I also wanted to highlight our friends from Kentucky Spin, Rhonda, glad you're on here. They are a fantastic resource, and they have done a lot of work around COVID-19. They also have video series on their website, so I wanted to include that as well. We recommend parents to contact them frequently. If you have questions, if you need support, they're there for you. And so I just wanted to make sure that I did not neglect that resource, because that is a great resource for parents of students with disabilities. And if you remember nothing else from what I have presented so quickly here, please remember Shasta Hensley's name. She is our parent and family engagement consultant. If you have any questions, even if it's not about content that we presented today, as a parent and family member of a student with a disability, she will help you. You reach out to Shasta and she will help you. She's very passionate. She's on a number of parent and family groups, and she is willing and waiting and ready to help anyone who may need it. So are there any questions? I went through that pretty quickly for the sake of time.
Well, this is Rhonda. I don't know, can you hear me?
I can, Rhonda. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm so tickled, and I loved when I saw your name on here. First, let me just say how amazing it has been, because I don't know that many people understand that in other states, Kentucky has been very specific. We are very fortunate. Kentucky's been very specific, even in the guidance that KDE has put out, where it's not disability specific. There has been intentional effort to not forget about special populations and our children with disabilities and the guiding questions. And looking at what our families need. And again, it's ever changing, because we're all making our way through this as possible, but I don't know that a lot of people understand how very fortunate we are in that there has been a priority put on making sure that our children with disabilities stay at the forefront and don't get forgotten. So I guess I wanted to say a thank you. And anyway, all of us working together, because there are so many resources and things that are available, whether it be for a parent, a youth, or professionals. The sharing of all of this is what's really going to help everybody do better. So I'll hush, but I'm very grateful, and the continued partnership and the input from everybody. I think that is what's going to make a difference for our children.
Thank you, Rhonda. And we appreciate the work that you and your team are doing for students as well. And, you can, like I said, Rhonda is a great resource, and also you can contact Push and Shasta. She's great, but you can also contact me as well if you like. I've also included my contact information. And if there are no other questions, and thank you for your comment, Rhonda, really appreciate it. I'm going to turn it over to Sylvia Starkey.
Thank you, Veronica.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Sylvia Starkey, and I was asked to, wrong screen. Hang on. I was asked to come today and present to you guys on compensatory education and extended school year services. And just kind of my intent today is to really just walk you through a guidance document that has already been created by the department, and hopefully get you all of the information that you need in order to have meaningful conversations when we return back to in-person instruction. So the guiding question for this is really about what guidance and support do families need when determining compensatory education and extended school year services for students. So we'll come back to that at the end of the presentation. So when you look at the document and you access that, you will find that there are 4 distinct sections. The first section is about FAPE and free, which is a free appropriate public education, and how to provide that during remote instruction. The second section is really about compensatory education, and the third section is about extended school year services, and then it follows up with a question and answer section that's broken down into questions for compensatory education and questions for extended year school services. When you look at the actual document, And I'm going to pull it up so you can see it. You can see how it's structured. All of that is there. There's an overview. And again, you'll see the part about FAPE. Then there's compensatory education. The part I wanted to show you that isn't in that overview is that there's actually a comparison chart. There's lots of confusion between the two. And so this chart will lay it out and so that you can see the differences between what is compensatory education and what is extended school year services and how are they different. And like we said, you know, there's also a section that talks about important things to remember for each one of those. So that's available as well as part of that document. I'm going to hit the high points of the document and just kind of talk you through what those pieces are so that you're aware of them. So the important parts to remember are that regardless of the instructional delivery model, whether it's NTI, in-person, or hybrid, local school districts remain responsible for providing FAPE to students with disabilities. So as a result of the inability to provide in-person instruction, there might be certain special education or related services that are difficult or even possible to provide during a pandemic or times of remote instruction. A good example of this could be things that have to be done in person, like orientation and mobility services if a student's not able to do it in an in-person situation. When special education and related services are not provided in accordance with how it's written in the IEP, regardless of any reason why, it may result in a denial of FAPE. It doesn't automatically result in a denial of FAPE, but it may. It's possible. The remedy for failing to provide FAPE is compensatory education services. And the goal of compensatory education is really just to place the student in the position that they would have otherwise been in had there not been a denial of FAPE. So OCL, you know, there's lots of conversations about terminology. And so when we developed this document, it was released in July, towards the end of July, on July 20th. There was lots of conversations about, do we call it compensatory education or do we call it, you know, missed services or whatever else? And so we've really just encouraged districts to really consider the conversation but to know that, you know, OCL kind of discourages districts from shying away from the compensatory education discussions. And that regardless of, you know, what you call it, it still remains compensatory education. So it's just important to acknowledge that any services that are designed to place a student in a position he or she would have otherwise been in, but for the lack of educational benefit that resulted from a denial of FAPE, is indeed a compensatory education service. So even if you call it something else, it still would be compensatory education. And so I think that's probably important for parents to you know, keep in mind. So let's talk a little bit about just compensatory education as a whole, and then we'll talk about ESY, extended school year services, as a whole. Compensatory education is defined by case law, and the purpose of compensatory education is really not punishment of the school district. It's awarded as a result of an IDEA dispute. So maybe it could be potentially ordered through due process hearings or an IDEA formal complaint, or it can be voluntarily given as a remedy by a student's admissions and release committee. So if a student was denied FAPE, the district could voluntarily enter into compensatory education to remedy those services. Compensatory education is not a blanket level service. They're really reviewed on a case-by-case basis, depending on the needs of the student. Awards for compensatory education must be reasonably calculated to provide educational benefit, and they can extend a student's eligibility beyond graduation or age 21. But it's important to remember that it does not include post-secondary services. So a student you couldn't use compensatory education to help pay for college if your student is a senior. So now we'll talk a little bit about extended school year services. So extended school year services are what we call ESY. And so extended school year services are specially designed instruction and related services that are provided to a student with a disability beyond the normal school year in accordance with the child's IEP, and they're provided at no cost to the parent. There is some case law that really kind of talks about extended school year services. So to establish ESY as necessary to provide a student with a FAPE, it's incumbent upon those proposing ESY for inclusion in the IEP to demonstrate in a particularized manner related to the individual child that the ESY is necessary to avoid something more than an adequately recoupable regression. More specifically, it has to be shown that ESY is necessary to prevent a student to benefit from instruction. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit more in just a second. When you're discussing extended school year services with an ARC, your admissions and release committee for your child, it's important that the ARC considers the student's tendency to regress, their prior regression, their ability to recoup lost skills, and their progress towards educational goals. It'll be really important, particularly after COVID, for us to remember that nearly all students regress after summer and extended breaks. That's something we would expect of all students, not just kids with disabilities, but not all students with disabilities qualify for extended school year services. Students who end up qualifying, who are eligible for extended school year services, have a likelihood of significant regression and slow recoupment. So they regress significantly and take a very long time to gain those skills back. ARCs are responsible for planning the type, the location, and the amount of services that are to be provided to students. And those decisions, again, are always made on a case-by-case basis based on the needs of the student. And school districts may not limit the provision of extended school year services to specific categories of disability or unilaterally limit the type or amount or duration of those services. So just to wrap up, that's kind of the information that was put out in that document and an overview of what all is already available. So the question we have for you is, what additional guidance and support do families need when they are meeting with ARCs to determine compensatory education and extended school year services for students?
So Sylvia, I don't see any hands up, and in the chat there was just a question about getting a copy of the PowerPoint, which Leslie said she could send, as well as Shasta provided a link to the document. There was a comment that this document has been critical for families and professionals in understanding Comp Ed and ESY. Okay, I don't see any more questions.
Okay, thank you guys so much.
If I could, again, it's Rhonda. I don't hush over here, but
Hi,
one
Rhonda.
of the things, hey, that I think is going to be real critical, and I know Shasta and I have talked about it, I think building upon this Comp Ed guidance document, and I'm so grateful that it identified, because the last thing that we want is people to end up in court, right? Because nobody wins. And that actually delays services even more for children who would qualify. And the fact that in this guidance document, it stated it could be an ARC team decision, which I think is only going to help things greatly. But I do see that there needs to be the huge education piece, not just for families, but professionals. How do we build upon this guidance so that we are setting things up and get those conversations going? Not only that, how then are the ARCs going to determine and gauge the Comp Ed that would be needed, and really looking at the further guidance, because there's on a daily basis, schools, parents, everybody, there's not enough time in the day to do that, what you normally have to do. But then looking at tackling this and how we can get guidance on how ARC teams can do this, and all of us partnering together, not just that it's a KDE, which we all do every day, is that how do we provide this to where this is a natural next step, that it's not you're being punished. The pandemic has created this, but then how we calculate it and get an actual true picture per child, because the children are going to be everywhere across the board with all this. So any way that we could build upon this guidance document, I think is only going to help everybody involved.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your feedback. We'll look into that.
Yeah, Judith Bradley has her hand up.
Hi, Judith.
Hi. Yes, thanks. So I second Rhonda's comments, and specifically, I wonder although Kentucky's regulations for ESY state that it has to be used for recoupment, the IDEA requirement is much broader, and in fact does not specify that. And given the situation with the pandemic, I'm wondering if we can waive the requirement that Kentucky imposes and consider using ESY as a fulfillment of comp ed, again, on a case-by-case basis, but as a way of fulfilling that for students with disabilities whose ARC teams determine that it's necessary, and really have that happen over the summer. So that's one suggestion that might be examined. Secondly, I'm further wondering if we might be able to expand access by doing some emergency certification of therapists, community therapists, to supplement some of the support that our school therapists would normally be providing for those students who cannot, for some reason, be physically in school. So community occupational, physical therapists, speech therapists for our 0 to 3 kiddos. We have developmental interventionists within communities who might be able to be EPSB certified under emergency circumstances to help pick up the slack in situations where we either have educators who are immunocompromised and therefore can't deliver services and or where there's just a gap. Again, I don't need a direct response. These are ideas. I think we just have to really marshal every creative bone that we have, put on our thinking caps, and really extend, how we look at delivering these things, because I am on the phone almost daily, and I know Rhonda is as well, with families who are desperate to get, in particular, the therapeutic interventions and those needs filled.
I appreciate you bringing ideas to the table. We'll definitely look into them. So thank you for bringing all that to our attention. I appreciate it.
Sylvia, I don't see any other questions or hands. So
thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here today. I appreciate it. I appreciate the speakers. Megan has put in the chat box the exit slip. And if you all would please take the time to fill that out. We were able to get some of our topics from today from the exit slips we got from our September meeting. Our next meeting will be on March the 10th in 2021. Have a great day.